everyone. My name is Joanne Shango. I am the head of school at the Montessori School Rochester here in Rochester Hills, Michigan, where we are enjoying spring, although I am told that some chilly weather might be coming through at the end of this weekend or the early part of next week. Right now we're just focusing on the nice spring weather and all of the flowers that are growing. We hope you guys are experiencing a nice spring or whatever season you might be experiencing in your part of the world. I thank you again for joining us. I thought I would give you a little bit of background on myself today before we went into the topic of discussion, which is play being the work of childhood and fostering independence in play. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background. I have been a trained Montessori guide for 26 years. I started in 1994. I was a college student at the University of Michigan. I was studying fine arts with a concentration in painting and drawing. And with that, I had also made a connection in a Montessori school. It started when I was in high school at a wonderful school called Bloomfield Maples Montessori, which I believe is still there today, being run by a colleague of mine. And from there, I went on to a school called Law Montessori School in Ann Arbor, and I worked my way through college working at the Montessori school. As a very young woman, I was 20 years old, I believe. I was sent to do my Montessori training through the Michigan Montessori Teacher Education Center, which at the time was located in Rochester Hills. And from that point, I fell in love with Montessori. Everything about what I saw and the way children were treated, the respect that children were given in a Montessori classroom really spoke to me. As a student that struggled myself when I was growing up for a variety of reasons, experiencing a classroom as I did at Bloomfield Maples Montessori first and later at Law Montessori School, to see children innately being respected for their thoughts, for their explorations, for their feelings. Everything about the experience of the child was validated and was respected. And that's what spoke to me most, and I believe has carried me for the past 25 years. In 25 years, I have been a guide in a primary classroom. I have helped to set up and work in infant and toddler communities. I have worked in elementary communities, and most recently I was trained as an adolescent guide through high school. And in each of those experiences, every time I walked in and feeling like it was something new that I would have to learn, what I found was that there was an innate connection, and it really stemmed on focused on the respect of the child and understanding what they were going through in their different planes of development, as they're referred to in Montessori and in other child development circles. In the different planes of development, be it birth through age 6, which is early childhood, or the elementary years of 6 to 12 years old, or adolescence, which is 12 to 18 years old, these children, these young humans, are exploring the world, trying to figure out how it works in all of its parts in relation to themselves. And they do that best through concrete explorations and play. We call it work in a Montessori classroom because play is indeed the work of childhood. When the space in which they are exploring and growing and learning is protected, that play is their work. That's where they develop this unbelievable concentration and focus in order to figure out the concepts that they are eagerly trying to master. That might be something as simple as pouring from an open cup into another vessel. It could be the exploration of geometrical shapes. It could be inclined planes. It could be creating a garden and watching it grow. There's so many different forms of this play and work of childhood. And in every age group that I have worked with, watching these children as they are so different from the other group that I might have been working in. I specialize in early childhood, the 3 to 6 year old age group. And yet when I look at an infant and watch their work, of exploring their bodies, figuring out what their bodies are doing, absorbing language, learning how to reach or turn or pull themselves up, to take those first steps, to begin running, to pick themselves up. That's this beautiful work, and it's joyful. And that from infancy is a key component to the independent work of the child in any age group. As a toddler, as they try to figure out how everything works, I referenced the story of my son with the garage door opening and closing. That was big work, and he thought it was wonderful. It was really very enjoyable to him. We, as adults, don't necessarily find much enjoyment of watching the garage door open or close. We find security in the fact that it's closing, or a freedom in that it's opening so that we can pull our car out of the garage. He found enjoyment in that. Another moment when he was a young toddler was we were in a restaurant, and he was watching all of the servers stacking and clearing tables, and he began stacking all of the plates at our table, and he would stack them and then he would unstack them, stack them and unstack them. And I would hear people around us saying, how is that woman letting her child do that? He's going to break something. And yet I was watching him, and I wasn't engaged with him. I was with my good friend Maria, and we were talking and chatting, but I was watching and observing him. And he was very engaged. He was not going to drop anything. He was not being careless. It was really big work for him, and it was so much fun. Every time he finished stacking them, he clapped. And then he would unstack them and proceed again, over and over. It went on for about 15 minutes. And I thought, he wasn't confined, he wasn't constrained, he wasn't frustrated that we were at a restaurant. Instead, he was engaged and he was exploring, independent, even though I was right there. And that's really what leads us into our conversation. Children can engage in independent play, but they first need security of knowing that you're there. We talked about this the other day, where we discussed spending time with your children, going outside with them, making those connections that right now during these stay-at-home orders, many of us have more time, or at least appear to have more time, to our children because we're at home more often with them. And it's important to make those physical connections with them and spend time with them. Through that security in the relationship they have with you, and knowing that there's so many work and life and play experiences that they're having with you, provides them with a deeper security for their independent play. They feel emotionally secure in their space and with you, with their family unit and their place within the family unit. And then we get to help them engage in their own work or their independent play and protect that. If we're able to respect their independent play, that it has an important purpose that perhaps doesn't communicate itself to us, but that it does have a direct purpose for them and that they're engaged in it, if we can protect that, they are able and more than willing, but excited at the opportunity to explore without any interruption to their concentration. And that's what takes them into developing the skills that encourage their growth, not only physically, but emotionally and socially, intellectually, as capable little humans. It's very, very important to protect that space. And that's where we talked about the other day about when we were dealing with conflict with our child, when we needed them to do something that we were asking them to do. The coaching that I offered at that time was to first acknowledge what they were doing, and then invite them to do what you've asked them to do, with a reassurance that they could return to what they were doing. That is actually a protection of their work. That is an acknowledgement and a recognition that the work that they're doing is very important. Another tool that you could use in regard to that is when they are pulling out something that you know is going to be a long and engaged work. If you know that there isn't time, that you're going to be heading out or it's almost dinner time, protect their work before it even begins by prompting them with, there's only a few minutes, this is a big work, you like to work with it for so long, whatever language you'd like to use, but an acknowledgement that what they're choosing may need more time than what they have available to them. So it's setting up the parameters for them to be successful, particularly when it is time to clean up that work. That again gives them a respect to use their reasoning brains, which they all have. Their reasoning minds are beautiful. They do have those reasoning minds, and if they're communicated with respect, then they're more apt to engage in that reasoning brain so that they can communicate with you and foster more cooperation while taking them into a space where they can work independently of you. That work that is independent are probably the most special moments that a child can have in forming themselves. The busiest child, as well as the most introspective child, the quiet child, thrive in those moments where they have independent, concentrated work, where they are mastering a concept through the exploration of their hands. In Montessori, I always say it is the connection of the hand and the mind to the heart. And it really starts with the hands as they are exploring, as they are touching, as they are doing. That independent work, when we can foster it, when we can build a space for them that belongs to them and is protected and respected, is maybe the most spectacular gift you can give your child. It could be cardboard boxes. It could be crumpled paper. It could be sticks and logs from your backyard where they can build and explore with large gross motor. It could be any variety of things. It doesn't have to be the most expensive Montessori toy. It doesn't have to be the most expensive electronic toy or with something with bells and whistles on it. It's about toys or work, explorations and experiences that have a purpose for the child, and their purpose in the work may not be the purpose that you expect it to be. Oftentimes, particularly in a Montessori classroom, so many of our materials have multiple uses. There's a direct aim and there's an indirect aim to so many of the activities, and then there's also extension. So a work done by a 3-year-old has a different goal and aim than that same activity being done by a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, or in some materials, adolescent high school students. And we have to respect that as we provide the parameters, the work that they're doing is special and important to them. It can be different for each child, as long as the work that they do within it is also respectful of the materials, respectful of the space, and respectful of their exploration as we give it to them. We call those yes spaces, and I believe you can make a yes space in your home for any age child, whether that is your adolescent or your 2-year-old or your 7-year-old or your 3-year-old. A yes space is a space that has their work, their toys, their activities set up for them specifically. It is not a space that belongs to the adult. It is a space that the child can move about freely and safely in independent exploration. It will look different for your adolescent than it will for your toddler or your preschooler or your elementary child. And yet it still should be a yes space, a space where they can explore and make mistakes and explore again as they guide themselves to mastery. Marie Montessori had always said, if you give a child an activity and they already know how to do it, then you've waited too long. It's not problematic that they don't know how yet. It is the exploration with their hands, with their mind, that leads them to discovery, problem solving, logical thinking, that then takes them into a creative world where they can imagine what else can happen. Creativity is not simply painting or drawing, dancing or writing. Creativity is that thought that takes us past a problem and leads us to a solution. And that's what our children do when they have that independent work. So we really want to foster that in our homes, particularly now as we are home for, at this point, a considerable amount of time. We don't know what that's going to look like in the future upcoming weeks and months. And so we want to be able to maximize that for our children. With that, you're going to have happier and healthier children in your homes, and you'll see that your home life is more peaceful, more productive, and more joyful in its explorations. To continue on with independent exploration and not always understanding their purpose, one of my favorite stories, I had a little girl and her name was Nevada, and she was 5 years old. She was in the first classroom I ever had at Montessori school in Ann Arbor, and her mother was a professor, and she was delightful, this little girl. She was little blonde hair, and she'd been with me since she was 2.5 years old, and she had done the metal insets. The metal insets are these like metal puzzles that have shapes, and the puzzle piece comes out, and we call that the inset, and there's an outline of the exterior square that the shape lived inside of, and it's meant to prepare the hand for writing. The children are tracing that shape, and there's multiple steps to it. Well, this little girl had done that work over the past few years. She was moving into reading, writing, mathematics, but for a few weeks she started solely concentrating on these metal insets, and I kept observing, and one day her mother, who was absolutely fabulous, came to me and said, "I absolutely love all of the shape books that she's bringing home. However, isn't she ready for other things? I mean, she was on the cusp of reading. She was doing great math. What's going on?" And I said, "I don't know. I do not know what's happening in that beautiful little brain inside of her head. However, I know that this work is purposeful. When she works, it's as if everything in the classroom, all other 29 children have faded away. She's completely and utterly focused on the activity. As she traced, it was just full concentration. Kids might run by, somebody might come and talk to her. She wouldn't even lift up her head. She was like, yeah, I'll be right there. And just tracing and tracing and tracing. Mom said, okay, I'm going to trust you. I will believe you. And I said, I'm going to trust in her. I believe that there is something that she's constructing within herself. There is a need for her to be there. I wish I knew what it was, but right now there is a need, so prepare yourself for a few more shape books. A couple weeks went by, and all of a sudden she was still at the metal insets, but she was no longer concentrated. Instead, she was tracing and looking around here and there and talking to other people, but she wasn't going to other activities. So that was my opportunity. And I walked in and I spoke with her for a little bit, and I said, you've been making so many shapes. Can you tell me all of these shapes? And she said, sure, this is the triangle, this is the oval, this is the ellipse, this is the quatrefoil. I said, awesome, would you like to write down the names? And she said, I don't know how to write these names. So I showed her how we would write the names on another sheet of paper, and she began writing the names. So she made a book that had her beautiful handwriting written for the name of each shape. So that book looked a little bit different. The next day I asked her if she would like to write a story. And she said, I would love to, but it's just squares and triangles and shapes. And I said, what would happen if you mixed these shapes together? And again I retreated. And that's all I said. I wonder what designs you could make if you put more than one shape together. And I walked away. For another week, she made a variety of books that had multiple different designs, geometric patterns and designs that were really exquisitely beautiful. She began coloring them in. As she created this book, I walked over to her again. I said, now would you like to tell your story? And she said, sure. So we pulled out our movable alphabet, which is a box that has cut out letters, the consonants and the vowels, cut out and able to be manipulated so that they can build words. So she made a story or a sentence for each page in her book. Afterwards, on her own, she took another book of paper and she wrote it down with her designs. That afternoon, as we sat at group meeting, she had constructed within herself all of this time where she was just making shapebook after shapebook, 2 days of actually working with the movable alphabet. This little girl said, I would like to read my story to my friends. And this little girl read out loud. She hadn't done it before. She had been building the skills over the past few years of phonetic reading and sight words, the designing, the writing, but 3 weeks of creating shapebook after shapebook after shapebook in full concentration. She was also piecing together so many different things that she had been working independently on previously. And by respecting the work that she was doing, because it was purposeful, because it was concentrated, because she was consumed by it and intent and content with it, she moved 2 days into writing and then reading her story. And that is the beauty that can emerge from independent play that we don't always understand. This is one of my favorite stories. When I first opened my school 10 years ago, as I would meet with prospective parents and prospective guides to work in our school, this story always came to mind because for me, the key components that a guide or any parent needs is that observation to see when a child is engaged in their work, in their play. Remember, work is the play is the work of childhood. When they're engaged, something amazing is occurring. Their hands, their mind, and their heart are building and working together, and they're helping to form that child for who he's going to be in the world later. So that story is pivotal for me. The parent and I had to trust each other and this little girl in her independent work. We had to trust in my observation skills. I didn't know what she was doing. I couldn't explain what her goal was. While she was doing book after book for week after week after week, I didn't know that was going to lead to reading and writing. I knew physically her hand was being prepared for writing because that's an indirect aim of the material in holding the pencil. But I didn't know where it was going, but I was observing. And to observe as a parent or as a guide in a Montessori classroom, you're able to distinguish whether that child is being purposeful and respectful with their toys, with their activities, with the work that they're exploring. If they're not working with purpose, which develops itself as a joy in the exploration, then there's something missing. And that's where we re-engage. We might redirect or guide, or as I did with this little girl, planted another seed to help her take the work that she was doing to another level when she stopped engaging with it fully, when it no longer had her full concentration. And that that reconnected her with the activity, and I was able to remove myself again. But it was my ability to respect the work that she was doing, the play, the exploration. And then it was my ability to observe and see when that full concentration, when that purposeful exploration had dissolved, was beginning to dissipate. So I stepped in, and then to protect the independent work, I stepped out again. And I trusted the child and her love of exploration. I trusted her brain and her ability to think about the seed I planted in connection with the work that she had already been doing, and she was able to move forward. And it took it to a place that I never would have guessed. And I wouldn't say that that always happens. In the metal insets, I wouldn't say that that takes us usually to reading. It takes us to some forms of writing and the physical ability to write. It gives us the recognition of shapes and geometry. But that connection to actual reading doesn't usually happen. In my 25 years, that was the first and only time that it actually took her to reading. It was a surprise, but that surprise wouldn't have happened if I didn't trust her independent work, if I didn't observe to see her connections with it, and if I didn't respect her space and consistently move away. She always knew I was there. She always knew I was there, but I wasn't needed. And when we foster independent play, when you begin to truly foster independent play, not as an opportunity just for you to have time to get your work done, but when you truly foster within your child their connection to the work or the play that they're doing, so that they work with it purposefully, something far greater than free moments for you, which are really wonderful, occurs for that child, and the direction that they go, the garden that they plant with all of those seeds that we offer to them, the seeds that they are collecting in their independent exploration that is truly meaningful solely to them in a way that is far different often than what we think, is a magical moment. So the next time your child is pulling out their magna square, I think we have magna tiles at my home, or they're Lincoln logs or blocks, or when they're outside and they are helping you rake leaves or jumping into leaves, know that when they're not exactly doing something the way you think they should be doing it, take that moment to step back to see what are they actually doing. Do they have a goal in mind? Not one that they can always vocalize, even as adolescents. They can't always vocalize it, but the practice, the engagement in practice and in repetition is what inspires independent work to flourish into discoveries that take the children down to the path of forming and creating themselves. I hope this was helpful for you. I really enjoy our meetings every day as we meet through this Facebook Live platform. I look forward to seeing you again. Stay safe, stay well, stay healthy. We love you and we miss you, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.